I think there is something that you have to give up a lot of times if you're really going to, do house hacking at a high level or really investing at a high level. And for me, that was like 3 months where I essentially became a hermit and I just worked on my house, right? And after that, that was such a rewarding experience. And so that might happen in a lot of different ways for people. A lot of people think I can just continue to live the same exact life as I do now, and I'm going to, be a successful investor and do all these things. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of, money at times that needs to go into it. And so if you want to do it quickly, a lot of times there's something that you have to give up.
Welcome to the House Hacking Success Podcast, where you'll learn the path to free rent and financial freedom through real estate. Featuring your hosts, BRRRR and Drew Klingler.
Hey everyone, real quick before we start the show, Brad wrote an amazing ebook that will teach you everything you need to know about house hacking and living rent-free. To get a free copy, text HouseHack, all one word, to 22828. That's HouseHack, all one word, to 22828 to get your free copy.
Welcome to House Hacking Success. I'm your host, BRRRR, with my co-host, Drew. Drew, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yourself, Brad?
I'm doing great. We had Austin Carroll on the show today. He's from Baltimore, Maryland. And this show was super in-depth. We talk about his 64 units, how he's become one of the top agents in his Keller Williams program, and just so much more. We go into so much depth in this podcast.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. He talks about how he got into house hacks and then how he transitioned from house hacks to doing live-in flips because he no longer wanted to be a house hacker. And then also talks about his expertise in BRRRR. And it's a very valuable episode.
Yeah, and live and flip is a house hack in and of itself. I mean, there's so many tax advantages. Like, for instance, you don't pay any taxes in capital gains on the appreciation that you sell for if you live in the property for 2 years. So he gets in depth on that. We go over BRRRR investing, which he has done so much of, and how he plans it, how he talks to contractors, how he, looks at properties. He draws up plans, just so much in depth. This can be a great episode for everyone to listen to.
Absolutely. He's also going to talk about private money lenders, and everyone's always interested in hearing about that. This is a great episode. I think everyone's going to enjoy.
Well, let's get to it, man. Welcome to House Hacking Success. Today we have Austin here. We're thrilled you're here, man.
Thanks, man. I'm excited.
So your story goes back a while. You have 64 units now in Baltimore area. You're a top performing real estate agent. But talk to us a little bit about your early background before getting into real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on a small farm in an area called Ellicott City, kind of between Baltimore and DC. And my dad owns an auto repair shop. And so growing up, we built a lot of stuff. So he did a lot of teaching of, hey, here's how we kind of build a little shed or, whatever it might be. And so that was kind of my first introduction to, I guess, construction or real estate. And if we fast forward during high school and college, I had a small handyman business. Where I just, go do random kind of jobs, painting, fence work, things like that. And eventually what happened was I went to University of Maryland Business School, thought I was going to go be a consultant. I always kind of thought about real estate a little bit. My parents were always interested in it, but never thought that was like a full-time thing. And with my resume and background, I had a recruiter reach out to me from a home builder. So I did an internship with them for a year, and then I had a part-time job where I was putting up inflatable movies during college. So it'd be like a Friday night, and a community association or something would be showing Frozen or whatever it might be, and I would go put that up. And I ended up putting it up a couple times for this developer down in DC that also owned a real estate sales team. And little did I know at the time I was just bagging popcorn. And I was talking to the CFO, and he said, "Hey, your resume sounds like it might be a good fit for us in this development company." And so I said, that'd be awesome. I'd love to learn more about it. So, a couple months later, we finally get together, and I end up interning there and then going full time there. So that was my real introduction to kind of real estate and how that works from a development standpoint. We were flipping houses, and they also had a large portfolio. So it was really cool to see kind of everything. And that was my introduction to both the strategies of real estate and like how that actually functions. So after that, I was still kind of between consulting and that. And I just realized the massive opportunity in real estate, especially in this region. And so that was kind of like the history of it and kind of how I got started and introduced to real estate in the first place.
So touching on something real quick that you just talked about, you had a small little handyman business, right? And you were learning the process kind of real estate and being able to put things together. Like how much did that help you going forward when you got into real estate, having that confidence, knowing how to put things together?
Yeah, I think you said the right word right there, which is confidence. And I think that's what a lot of people like. That's what you need to have in real estate. And so when you have the confidence, if you understand how things go together, you understand how, generally electrical works or generally you frame a house, different things like that, just give you so much confidence. And even if you're doing none of the work, which, at this point, I don't do really anything. I've probably become pretty inept with my hands at this point. I should probably get a little bit better with it again. But just the confidence that you have when you're going through and talking to a contractor, the words to use and things like that. And I think what most people don't realize, a lot of the things I learned also came from mission trips that I would do. So I did a lot of mission trips in high school where we'd go down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and work on stuff. And it's like, that is one of the greatest ways, every city has Habitat for Humanity or something like that. And so if you're a newer investor and you're trying to just get some general knowledge, yeah, you can get up projects and have, 30, 40 contractors through and just see what some of them say, see what other ones say. But you can also go to these areas like a Habitat for Humanity or something and volunteer and do some of the work yourself and talk to some of the people that maybe it's a great way to find contractors and stuff like that too. But I think that's where a lot of knowledge came from. But I think if you have a couple different, you can be really great at numbers. You can be really great at finding deals. You can be really great at raising private capital, or you can be really great at construction, and I think you have to have some combination of those to be a really good investor. And I think the construction piece is a huge part of that.
Very cool. So can we move forward and talk about your first house hack? Could you tell us about how you ended up finding it and how you financed it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first house hack was in an area called Riverdale, about 15 minutes outside of the DC area, right outside of College Park, where University of Maryland is, and that's where I went to college at. And it's actually funny. I was walking through the halls one day of the development company when I was interning there, my last semester in college. And one of the ladies, she happened to be a real estate agent, and I was walking by. I'd helped her with a couple things as an intern, and she just asked, "Hey, do you want to buy a house?" And I was like, "That sounds kind of cool. I don't think I want to rent. My parents live about an hour, 15 minutes from here, and that commute would be horrendous. So it's like, when my lease is up in college in August, I should probably figure something out." And so I talked to her, and she was like, "Yeah, like let's go check out some options. Like no pressure." And I generally knew I wanted something that I could do some work to and build some equity in. And then I didn't know house hacking or any of these terms at the time. I just knew, hey, I could probably rent a couple rooms out and reduce the amount I have to pay. And so we went to one house. It was actually one of the first houses that we saw. It was the one I ended up buying. And then I needed to see like 10 other ones after that to like actually know that one was the one I wanted to buy. And it was a Fannie Mae home path home. So it's the way that Fannie and Freddie, big holders of mortgages, get rid of a lot of their foreclosed on properties. To be honest, knowing what I know about mortgages and stuff like that now, I have no clue how she financed this for me. It was a conventional loan, 5% down, but like the water wasn't working in the property and things like that. So I don't know how she got, how she ended up getting that through and getting through that appraisal, which needs to usually have, running water and at least heat. Everything else can kind of, not look good. But anyway, so we end up going to closing, and then it was just 3-4 months of that was one of the only properties that I did a lot of the work, almost all the work myself, and just with family and friends. Your typical demo party where you invite all your buddies over and you take down walls and stuff like that, and the painting party where you have 20 people in and everybody's painting and things like that. So that was my first house hack. So I'll give you some numbers. I bought it for $192,000. And it had some seller subsidy and stuff like that to keep the cash low. I had about 20 grand just from saved up from, handyman business, things like that. So it wasn't one where I had, zero money in or anything like that. So bought it, used most of that 20 grand for the purchase of it and some of the beginning renovations. And over time, we probably ended up putting about $65,000 into it. It wasn't all at once, but that was through a series of just raising a little bit of private capital from family and friends, 20, 30K kind of thing. And then doing a refinance when it got to a certain point. And I did 2 refinances on that house. While I was there, then it was a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house. And so I rented the other 4 bedrooms out. So I lived for free, made $500 a month, had an awesome house, had huge appreciation. I actually sold it last year, I think, to another house hacker. So bought it 192, put 65 into it, sold it for 350. No real closing costs or anything. It was just kind of person to person transaction. So that's kind of like the breakdown of that one. But it was a fantastic house hack, to get started with.
That's awesome. So you started out, you did a 5% conventional is what you said. But you said you refinanced twice. Talk a little bit about that, the process, and why you decided to do those.
Yeah. So it was really a cash challenge. I started to run out of cash, and I was making money at the development job, but that was really my only other source of income. So once I got it to a place where it was good enough, then I did a refinance, and I did a FHA refinance, 85% loan to value ratio. And so I just wanted to get as much cash out of it as I could. This area was also pretty rapidly appreciating. When I look back, it was probably about 8% appreciation a year. So that first refinance I did, I took out as much cash as possible. Second refinance I did was to lower my my mortgage costs. So I got off the mortgage insurance, got a lower rate, things like that. So that was kind of the reason for them. And then also, so the first refinance was getting everything good in the house where I could rent it. The second one was a little bit more of like making it like I built a personal deck off of my my master suite and things like that. Put a little hot tub in, things like that. Things that like wouldn't necessarily be a good strategy for a house hacker, but like lifestyle, it was kind of cool to do. So that was kind of the difference between the 2 refinances there.
Awesome. And you can see the confidence, like we talked about earlier, being able to take on a project like that, taking on a bank-owned property. I did something very similar, for my first place. And I also started with a little handyman business. You just learn the ropes, right? And it's not the fact that you have to be really hands-on, because I wasn't when I started. But I mean, there are so many great resources like YouTube, right? You can read books on pretty much anything, right? Regarding, doing home, changing a toilet, doing some of these minor things. You just kind of learn it as you go, but it does build a lot of confidence.
I think there is something that you have to give up a lot of times if you're really going to, do house hacking at a high level, or really investing at a high level. And for me, that was like 3 months where I essentially became a hermit, and I just worked on my house, right? And after that, that was such a rewarding experience. And so that might happen in a lot of different ways for people. A lot of people think I can just continue to live the same exact life as I do now, and I'm going to, be a successful investor and do all these things. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of, money at times that needs to go into it. And so if you want to do it quickly, a lot of times there's something that you have to give up. And so I'm sure for you as well, if you were doing a lot of that stuff, like your buddies call you up and say like, hey, you want to go out on Friday night? And you're like, hey, I actually got to change a toilet, or, like I'm switching out my vanity, or, like whatever it is. And for me, that was like 3 months of intense, like doing the work. But it was super, super rewarding.
I'll never forget that when I first bought this place, it was almost a complete gut, kind of similar to what it sounds like yours was. And, New Year's Eve, all my buddies are texting me like, hey, you want to go out? And here I am putting up tile in the bathroom, doing a backsplash in the kitchen. And it just takes it takes some sacrifice sometimes. But at the end of the day, it'll reward itself, and it'll pay off for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's transition now. You went from house hacking to live-in flips, right? You did 2, and it sounds like you're about to do your 3rd. So kind of, walk us through that, what that is, and how people can utilize a live-in flip.
Yeah. So, Tony Robbins talks about this thing called net time, no extra time. And I think it's an interesting concept where if you're in the car, you're learning, you're listening to a podcast, you're doing something like that. When you have times where you're not necessarily focused on something, you should be, feeding your mind something else. In the investing world, I think that takes place in where you actually live. And so the 2 strategies behind that are either house hacking or a live-in flip. And so for a live-in flip, you're essentially flipping a house, but you're living in it usually for 2 years, so that you get the tax benefit of not having to pay any capital gains tax because it was your primary residence for 2 years. And so So for me, the next step after I left my house hack was, hey, my fiance was moving in. She didn't want to live with people. I didn't necessarily want to have that lifestyle anymore. And I didn't really want to do a multi-unit where we would have, separate units that we would be living in. So for me, it was, let's do a live and flip. And so we wanted to move up to the Baltimore area from the DC area because there's so much opportunity up here. I'm currently in Baltimore as well, in the investing world, where DC is just really, really heated. And if you don't have a large chunk of money to get started, it can be very challenging. So Baltimore was really the opportunity for me. You found kind of like a secondary neighborhood that's a fantastic neighborhood called Hamden. And found a house. So the numbers on this one was bought it for $132,000. Put about $70,000 into it, and then we just sold it about a year and a half ago for $275,000. So it was after closing costs and stuff like that, it was like a $50,000 gain. The coolest part of that is you get to live in a brand new renovated house. The challenge of that is, depending on how much of it you're doing yourself, you might live for a while in a not fully renovated house.
Right.
So it was like my evolution was like the first house I did like everything. This next house I didn't do quite as much, but it was still putting in the hardwood floors, still sanding and staining the stairs, putting in the kitchen, things like that. And so there was a little bit less that I did, but it was still a little bit of a challenge in that. So that was the next house hack live and flip. And then we realized, we want something a little bigger. It was a smaller kind of row home. And so then we moved into the house that we're in now, which is a really large 4,000 square foot row home. And then that one was another live and flip. So I bought that one for $225,000, put right around $100,000 into it. And the appraised value when we did our refinance about a year ago was $460,000. I don't think you actually get that on the market right here. I think it's more likely 400 or 425,000. But this project was a lot of risk taking on because it was drywalled and like everything needed to be finished, but there were like a lot of things that weren't necessarily done right. So a lot of people were kind of scared of it. The power of the live and flip though is that you essentially have, if you're going to live in it, you essentially have 2 years to mitigate any of the risks that you take on. So let's say there's a small dip in the neighborhood that you're in terms of valuations. If you're flipping a house and you're selling it right when a bunch of other stuff comes on the market or whatever, then you might be a little bit challenged to get that sold. Whereas with the live and flip, you can kind of start to look at things, time the market right, put it on the market in the spring when it's the hottest time, like really like decorate it nicely and stuff like that. Versus with the flip, you might not be able to do those things. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the power of the live and flip, but it's so nice to be able to have tax-free profits. And then it's also nice to be able to put a home equity line of credit on your property. And usually the banks, at least that I'm used to dealing with, don't do that with investment properties. But with your primary residence, you can put a home equity line of credit on it and use that capital for other deals and stuff like that.
Talk about that real quick. Just what is a home equity line of credit and how can people utilize it?
Yeah, so the home equity line of credit is it's basically a second loan on your property. So you're going to have your first loan that you either buy it with or you refinance if you're doing a live and flip with. And so you're going to have that first loan, and then you're going to have this line of credit that is going to specify, hey, your house has, let's say, $100,000 of equity in it. We're going to give you a loan up to $80,000 of that, and then you just draw on it as you want. So if you have a project, let's say that you're buying and you need some cash to get started on the renovation or something, then you can draw down from that $80,000, use it on that, and your cost of capital is, I would say, probably in the 4 to 5% range. So if your alternative is to use something like hard money, which is your flexible capital for flipping properties or doing renovations, that's usually 10 to 14%, and it usually comes with a lot of closing costs associated with. The home equity line of credit, most of the time you can get the bank to pay for the closing costs for the home equity line of credit, and then you have a 4 to 5% interest rate. So it's a really, really cool way to, and a lot of times you're paying interest only on those as well, versus like your normal mortgage where you're paying the whole amortization schedule and the principal and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I know my partner personally, he owns his house free and clear, him and his wife do, but they take that equity and they'll go purchase properties, right? And they'll renovate it with the HELOC. And then they'll refinance out into a conventional loan. They'll have 30% equity. They never put any of their own money in. They'll take that HELOC, put it back in the house, go buy another house, and it's a super advantageous way to buy property without the closing costs, right? Without the, initiating a bank loan. You buy it cash, right? Which means that you generally will beat out most people that come in with a conventional loan or whatever, because you can close within a week, or two. And so, yeah, very advantageous way to go.
Cool. So I think it was awesome that when you decided house hacking wasn't for you, you found a way to move into properties and still make them your investment properties by doing the live-in flips.
Right.
Now you're a real estate agent, and it sounds like you're helping other people find house hacks. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what unique ways you see people utilizing the house hack?
Yeah, absolutely. So my way to becoming a real estate agent was largely driven by my network. So I talked to you about the development company that I worked for. Awesome company if anybody wants to look it up and they're in the DC area, looking for a job or anything. It's the Menkiti Group. And so they also had an in-house sales team. And so I was interacting with the sales team a lot on our flips. I was helping them search the MLS or the multiple listing service where all of the data for houses is basically housed for houses on the market. And so I'd be searching it all the time, looking for properties to buy and things like that. And so I got a kind of a crash course in being an agent. And over time, then my buddies started to come over to my house and be like, "Hey, so like you're living in this house for free, or you're like making some money every month?" And I'd tell them the story, and they'd be like, "I kind of want to do that." So then I was like, well, maybe it would make sense for me to get my real estate license. And like a lot of investors, I was also thinking, you know what, like I'm going to buy some investment properties. I can be my own agent, and so I'm going to do it for that. And that's kind of how it started out. And then some of my buddies were like, "Hey, I want to buy a property." And I was like, "Okay, like let me like try to help you through this." And so, if I were to only be an investor, it probably would not be a good use of my time or money to be a real estate agent, unless I was also doing what I'm doing now and helping other people. And so, reason being is you actually have a lot of costs associated with being a real estate agent. You've got your MLS fees, you've got your brokerage fees, you've got your, local organization fees, all that stuff. And so, it's also actually a job. You actually have to learn stuff and do things, and it can be pretty difficult at times. So I decided that I was going to make the leap full-time to real estate agent probably after 2.5 years of being in the development company. And, then it was really just helping my network. And a lot of my network were guys that had graduated from college 2 years ago. They were tired of renting. They wanted to buy something. They were living with their buddies anyways, and they had the means to do it. And so the really cool thing about it is that so many, different people look at house hacks different ways. So I've sold a $500,000, 5-bedroom home in a really nice area house hack. And I've sold a $150,000, 3-bedroom house in kind of a rougher area house hack. And so there's so many different ways to do it. And so if somebody's looking at, how might they optimize it, a lot of it comes up to what are they willing to take on in terms of risk. It might seem really risky, the $500,000 house, but if you're getting, $1,200 a month for each bedroom, that might actually be less risky than the $150,000 house where you're only getting $500 for each bedroom. And so, you really have to learn how to evaluate risk in a different way than I think anybody has ever taught you. And that's one of my biggest challenges as a real estate agent, is helping my clients who are house hacking figure out their tolerance for risk and actually assess the risk of the situation. A lot of people are like, I want to be able to pay for the whole house mortgage comfortably if I were to not have any tenants. And then might be looking at 6-bedroom houses. Well, it's like, if you actually didn't have any other tenants in that, you're just like grossly neglecting it. It's actually very, very hard to not, fill 5 rooms and then have everybody move out and then not have anybody in the house. So it's like, let's actually evaluate that risk. It might be a risk that you'd have 2 or 3 bedrooms vacant at a time, but the fact that you would have all of them vacant is almost non-existent. So different things like that. And then in Baltimore area, we have a lot of multi-units as well. So with a house hack, you can buy up to a 4-unit property and put 3.5% down, or if you're using a conventional loan, you could do 5% down. And so that's another opportunity. So you kind of have your single family home with lots of bedrooms, house hack, and then you have your multifamily house hack, and then you've got a varying array of price points and locations, and that's kind of like the just kind of like if it were on a diagram and you were to say like, okay, over here is the multi-unit, here's the single families, here's your price points. You're just going to get varying things in each of them, and so that's like, it's really unique to see people say like, I want something under 200,000, but I want, 4 bedrooms. And it's like, okay, let's take a look. These are the areas you're going to get in. And then to see how they succeed with it. And then to alternatively have somebody with a $500,000 one, and see how they succeed. And really it's cool to see. I haven't had any clients, probably close to 20 clients that have house hack now. Only one of them had a bad experience and he ended up selling it for like a 40K profit. So, turned out to be not a bad experience.
Yeah.
It was like sewer line broke and stuff like that. But, that's kind of besides the point. So that's like, in terms of being an agent and helping, I do a lot of I help flippers, I help regular homeowners as well. But the house hacking is my favorite. But really that's the conversation is what's your risk and how do you want to run it in terms of price point, multifamily, location, things like that.
So let's kind of jump into that. Kind of combining the two, like when people talk to you, whether they should do multi-unit versus rent by the bedrooms, like what do you usually tell them? How do you advise them? And then when newbie house hackers come to you, like what is kind of the process you kind of run them through? Because there is a little bit of a difference between renting by the bedroom versus multi-unit, right? In your tenant base, where you are. How do you speak to newbie house hackers when they come to you?
Yeah. So the first thing that I try to get to is, are you looking at this because you just want to, live in a good place, but you don't want to pay, the full amount that rent would be or something like that? Or do you actually want to make this into like your first step to being an investor? And there's a very big difference there because you might be looking at a 3-bedroom home where you still pay $600 a month or something like that. If you're just looking at it kind of like a lifestyle kind of thing, I'm going to be in this area for 3-4 years. I have some buddies that want to live with me, things like that. If you're really numbers focused and you want this to be like your jump pad for investing, I'm going to say one of the biggest things is we want to run the numbers and make sure that it cash flows for you. And so one of the biggest things for that, I think in the market that we're in, multi-units are very, very hot. There's not a ton of them. And so you're either going to typically overpay on them or be beat out by an investor that can, close in cash or something like that. So those are a little bit more challenging. If you're willing to be patient, we might be able to find something. But a lot of times the best way to go is a single family home. And we've got a lot of areas where a lot of young professionals live, and those are the hot areas. And so it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but from my experience, the house hacks work a little bit better, kind of at the higher price point. We're in the city and the school system isn't necessarily great. So you've got a 5-bedroom house. It's not really a family that's going to be moving in. It's going to be somebody that's doing like what these guys are doing. They're going to be renting some bedrooms out, living with their buddies, whatever it might be. And so you tend to get a little bit lower price point in terms of if you were to put that in the county with a nice school system where you'd be competing with some families and things like that. So I think for us, the opportunity is how many rentable spaces are there? And I don't know if you guys talk about on your podcast the 1% rule, but just a real quick recap of what that is it's a relation of the purchase price to how much rent you're getting. And so, let's just take a simple deal. Let's say you buy a house for $200,000. The 1% rule says you should rent it out for $2,000 a month, roughly. Now, in different areas, you're going to adjust that percentage up. In Baltimore, we're going to be looking for, closer to a 2% rule. In DC, you're going to look at like 0.5%. So if you buy something for $400,000, you might be renting it for $2,000 or something like that. So you can use that same thing on a house hack. And so if you're looking at a 4-bedroom house versus a 5-bedroom house, let's say you're going to get $800 a month in rent. Well, what's the difference in the price that you can kind of go there? And so if we use the 1% rule, you should be able to pay $80,000 more for that 5-bedroom than for that 4-bedroom. Well, if it's only $30,000 or $40,000 more, then it's a better opportunity to buy the 5-bedroom versus the 4-bedroom. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's basically Go ahead.
And it does, because this is the distinction I try to, drive home with people all the time. In my markets, which is pretty similar to where you're at, I'm in Detroit and Flint, right? We have coastal investors come in and get 3% rule, right? They can buy properties for dirt cheap, fix them up a little bit, rent them out, right? But then when you get into where we invest, where Drew and I invest, which is more of the suburbs, right? You're looking at a 1% rule. And a lot of people come in hard fast, like, hey, I want a 2% rule. Well, you're not really going to find it if you're looking for a higher quality of tenant, right? If you want to get into a good school district, right? You're not really going to find a 2% rule. And you just have to know what the rules are, how they apply, and where you're at. Because if you're looking for something, in the suburbs like you are in a good school district outside of Baltimore, and you're trying to find a 2% deal, you're going to get really frustrated, right?
Right.
But you just have to know where you're at, what you're looking for, and why you're looking for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so being able to take that and valuing the price of a room is really what that rule helps with in a house hack. So if you have a 3-bedroom, $300,000 house, you're paying $100,000 a bed, per bedroom. And so you just have to do that calculation, but it helps you understand the difference between 4 rentable spaces and 6 rentable spaces. And really where the cash flow starts to come in for clients that I see is the sweet spot is around like 4 bedrooms and a basement. Maybe the house hacker lives in the basement and rents out the 4 bedrooms, or 5 rentable spaces is a really fantastic kind of sweet spot to start investing. And if people want a little bit, one of my clients actually, who's become one of my partners, Devin Marino, he's got a YouTube channel that talks a lot about like individual, like he'll actually manage some house hacks for other people. So he talks about like all these nuances of like, should you buy furniture? What kind of furniture should you buy? Like, what should you provide? Like, what should you charge for? Like all that stuff, which is really cool. That's a good resource for people as well.
Cool. So could you tell us about your expertise in BRRRR investing? What is it and how can investors capitalize on that?
Yeah, so the BRRRR investing is how I built the portfolio, outside of the live and flips and the house hacks. And so that has been, I think BRRRRs can take a number of different ways that you can execute on them. There's your typical one where you're going to buy a house that needs a full renovation, or a multi-unit that needs a full renovation. You're going to buy it cheap enough that you can put the renovation into it. And then with your after valuation, you're able to pull out all your money and kind of repeat it. There's also an opportunity if you know areas and you just get something for a low enough value that you can then take that and you can refinance it and you don't actually have to do really any work to it. So that's kind of like the 2 spectrums of the BRRRR. So one, you just find a good enough deal where you can just refinance out of it, or in Baltimore, we have a lot of areas where it's relatively block to block. So you might be able to buy on one block and get a valuation from another block from an appraiser. And so it's pretty cool as long as you're comfortable with where that is. We bought a single family home from a wholesaler for $63,000 and we're doing a refinance now. It's worth about $100,000. So we'll be able to pull out all the cash, and all we did was just, purchase it cash, purchase it quickly. And then understand what the valuations were like in the area and what an appraiser might do it. And I think we could actually sell that one for that. So that's like the light end of the BRRRR, being really well capitalized and being able to find the deals. And then the other one, to give you another example, would be like me and one of my partners bought a 18-unit portfolio, 6 different buildings. Basically, all of them were 3 units, and we renovated the whole thing. Bought it for $200,000, put about $900,000 into it. We're just finishing it up. And those were like really robust projects, really challenging in the fact that it took probably about 9 months longer than I thought it would. So it took, a year and a half, almost a little bit longer than a year and a half to get everything completed. But what's really cool about that is that just from the construction, we got enough equity into it. And then you want to make sure that it still cash flows. So you're going to then take a look at the cash flow of what you get from that. You want to make sure you get all your money out, but maybe you don't want to take it to the max loan that you could get on the property, so you could get a little bit more cash flow or whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think really, if you're doing the BRRRRs, I think you have to be really good at either finding contractors, finding deals, or a combination of the two, because you can really look at it those 2 different ways, where you just find really good deals and then you can just kind of use the valuation that you can get afterwards as the way to get your cash out, or you're actually doing a pretty robust construction project. And every market's a little bit different in that as well. That's kind of what our market looks like.
Awesome. So you spoke a little bit to the difference between like a small multifamily BRRRR deal versus a single family. Talk about like how you plan a BRRRR deal, and for someone looking to do it, when do you start getting contractors involved? Like when you go into it and you start to do some rough numbers on what it'll cost, right? You might be off by 5 or 10,000 either way, right? When do you start getting contractors involved? How do you plan a BRRRR deal?
Yeah, great question. As much as possible, I'm going to get a contractor involved after. I'm going to go look at it first, and I'm just going to say, does this even make sense? To bring a contractor through or whatever. A lot of times, I'll make sure I get my square footage measurements. I'm going to get as much stuff as possible. How many windows am I replacing? How many interior doors am I replacing? How many exterior doors am I replacing? As much of that as possible, and then I'm going to get my my square footage of what's the actual building like. And I try to break out as much as possible as I can. And so I've got my own pro formas where I actually, look at, okay, I've got this much square footage. I'm going to need this much flooring. And there's a lot of stuff that's kind of commoditized. So your price for flooring installed is generally going to be about the same, give or take maybe 50 cents a square foot. But if if you have a 2,000 square foot house, you could have 20 contractors through there, and of your best contractors that are giving you the best price, you're going to be relatively close. And similar with like hanging sheetrock, and so I think it's important to start knowing what some of those numbers are. I think Jay Scott has a book out, the book on rehab costs, I think, or rehabbing properties. And that's a really great reference to say, for my window, I should pay X amount. And then, verify with people in your market and things like that. But a lot of these items you can kind of come up with yourself. And then it depends how you run the project. So if you hire like a full-on general contractor, then you're probably going to want to get him out there, right away. For me, I know what my flooring guy is going to charge. I can call up my plumber and say, hey, I've got 3 bathrooms and a kitchen. Here's kind of the layout. What would be the rough price? And he's going to give me a price within $500. Same thing with my electrician. Hey, it's generally this size. What's my general price? Same thing with my HVAC, my air conditioning and heating. And then where I have a little bit of trouble is like on my numbers with like painting and even drywall. Sometimes I'll count the drywall and then I'll be significantly off. I'll say, oh, I only need 120 boards of drywall in here and I need 200, or whatever it might be. So for me, I get in the contractors that I'm not entirely certain of. And I want to get those, or framing. Framing can pretty drastically change based off of what I think. So I'm going to usually get my framer and my drywaller in there is what I'm trying to do. And those are usually the only numbers that I need to get to where I feel comfortable, actually putting an offer on a property. Personally, I do drawings on every property. I think it helps keep the contractors in line as well, where I can say, you didn't put a light here and it's clearly on the drawings that there should be a light here. Yeah, so I think that's a really great tool. So if you can find a guy to do floor plans for you for a relatively affordable price, our guy out here does them between $700 and $1,000 per building. But for me, it's $1,000 very well spent because I can just give it to contractors. I can get bid prices that way. Good contractors will be able to do a bid price based on that, and maybe some pictures and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I set one up, and it depends on your level of expertise. But for me, I've gotten to a level where I feel comfortable knowing how much the windows are going to be, or how much the flooring is going to be, or the doors and things like that. And then I'll just verify my plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, and then all the other stuff I might actually get a contractor through.
Right. And if you talk to contractors, a lot of times you'll say, hey, listen, and I do this with the contractors I deal with. I'm like, hey, I have no problem doing all the groundwork. Do you have a price list, right? And so with a couple of my contractors, they've given me price lists, right, for their flooring, install price, like you said, versus this or that. And so you go there and I draw out floor plans. There's a couple unique sites you can use for free. Magic Plan is pretty cool. You can use with your phone. You can do a whole drawing of the property, not quite as in depth as having something to actually draw it out for you, but it's a good first step. And so you kind of get the square footage. You can then say, hey, I have 1,000 square feet I need of, tile versus, whatever it is. And you can go get a basic price. And then when you get to a certain point in the deal where you're under contract or whatever, Now all of a sudden you get the contractors out there, you find all the variables, right? You get it down to more of a concrete price. But there's a lot of legwork you can do. You learn so much. That's how I learned a lot about all of this, is just doing the legwork. So moving forward with these BRRRR deals, you use basically either private money or equity partnerships. Talk a little bit about the difference between private money and bringing on partners who have equity positions with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So none of my equity partners, so I've got 3 partners, all of us are 50-50 in our various ones, and they've all come about differently. For my first deal after my house hack, I had left my full-time job, so I no longer had verifiable income for a lender. And so my best friend, who we've known each other since we were 5, was interested in like, hey, maybe like I'll co-sign the loan. And so he kind of like bought in some equity, and then it kind of evolved from there, where it's like, actually, I want to be a real estate agent. He's going to be on my real estate sales team that I own now. And he's kind of, now he's running some projects. So he's had like 2 years of kind of learning from me different stuff. My other partner, happened to meet him. He was a flipper introduced to by the CEO of the company in the Mankiti group. And, we hit it off and bought a bunch of units together. And he has some different expertises that I do, right? And then my third partner was one of my clients who was like really motivated, really interested, but didn't quite have the knowledge. And so, he became an equity partner. I found some deals. I didn't have the capacity to actually run them. And so he's kind of running those deals for me, with kind of me guiding him and things like that. So all of my equity partnerships aren't because they've contributed capital, although sometimes that is part of what we're doing, is just, hey, if there's capital that needs to be contributed, who's in the best position to contribute it currently. So I'm not raising any equity partners because of money. Reason being is because we can raise the capital, and that's part of all of our responsibilities, is raising some private capital. So we usually raise anywhere from 10 to 15%, depending on the deal, how long we're going to have it, things like that. And we try to raise as much privately as we can. And the reason being is because we're saving the fees and things like that for our alternative, which would be hard money. So hard money, we're going to pay, maybe a point or, 1 to 2% on the loan origination fee. And then we're going to pay, 10 to 14% on the interest rate. So if I can cut off that fee in there and just have it raised privately, then that's what I'm going to do. So we just raise it with promissory notes. So it's just basically personally guaranteed. And then it will be tied to a project. So we'll say, hey, we've got this project. We expect it to deliver in 9 months and be refinanced out of it. We're going to write a 9-month note. We're going to, sometimes we'll pay monthly. Now we're trying to pay more of it monthly versus deferred. In the beginning, when we didn't have a lot of cash, we were trying to defer it, all the interest that we were paying, until we actually got paid on the refinance. But now we're actually in a pretty good place where we'll pay it out of the cash flow of the properties, rather than have a big, amount due at the end. And so I think how you do that successfully is just ask a lot of people. You'd be surprised sometimes the people that are interested in contributing money. And so for us, we have we got to a point where we're like, all right, minimum amount is $5,000 that we'll raise from a single person, just because of the logistics of all of it. And then, it goes up from there. We've got people that have $100,000 with us. We've got people that have $5,000 with us. But it's really just going through and raising that money. We do a lot of education to our clients, and a lot of people might be people that want to invest, but they're not ready to yet. They want to see a deal. So we'll say, hey, you've got, $30,000. If you want to lend it to us for the life of this project, we'll kind of show you a little bit of what's going on here. If you ever want to walk through or something like that, come walk through. We'll show you the stages. We'll kind of share some of our contractors and stuff like that for you when you actually get in the game. So that's one of the ways that we're raising it. But yeah, we try to raise as much with private capital. It's also just so much more flexible. With hard money, you're going to have a large amount of this money that's sitting in a pot to the side that you're going to have to do the construction first before you can draw on that money. Mm-hmm. Whereas private money, it's in your account from day one, so you can go as quickly as you want to. So those are some of the differences, and that's kind of how we build it. But for me, an equity partner has to be somebody that is also, all my partners are the long-term property managers of it. That's important to me because I don't necessarily want to be collecting the rent and things like that. I'm the type of person that would use a property manager anyways. So if I can cut out that cost, have my partner manage it much better than a property manager would, then that's kind of how I set it up. So I'm going to run it. I'm going to usually find the deals and run it, and then we're each going to raise private capital as needed. And then at the point where it's delivered, then my partners are going to place them and kind of manage the property management of it. And that's kind of how I run it.
That's awesome. And they have vested interest, right? And so that they are taking care of the property, and it really is a great way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So you quit your job in development to become a real estate agent. And a lot of people don't really take that leap to become a full-time real estate agent. Could you tell us how you knew you'd be a good agent?
Yeah, so I always joke that like when people are asking like, what do you do in your partnerships? Like what's your position and things like that. And I think like my position is the confidence. And so that's always been something that I've had is like, I just believe in my ability. And I think a lot of people, that's one of the biggest things that is a big difference maker is, do you believe in your ability to be able to go out and be successful at this, or are you scared of it, And so that's one of the biggest things for me, being a real estate agent. I'm very analytical too, so I'm going to run the numbers and make sure that it makes sense. I think right now, if you're willing to do the work of a real estate agent, which a lot of people I don't think know necessarily what the work of a real estate agent is, and that's the problem is most people get into it and think like, hey, I'm just going to be showing houses, or somebody's going to give me all my leads and I'm just going to be like working with clients. In real estate, as a real estate agent, your job is lead generation. And it's that way with most business owners. If you're going to go out and start a contracting company, your job is lead generation. Quite often you're not going to be the one that's doing all the work and stuff like that. Or if you are, your responsibility is also getting the clients. Mm-hmm. So I think people that understand that and are willing to do that work are the ones that are going to be successful. Same thing with the people that are just going to quit their job and become a full-time investor. You're lead generating in so many different ways. You're lead generating for properties, you're lead generating for capital, you're lead generating for contractors, maybe for partners, like all of this different stuff. And if you're not committed to doing that, then you're probably better off served, working for somebody else that is willing to do that. So for me, I understood pretty early on that was going to be my responsibility. My responsibility is getting people. I understood how that kind of looped in with my whole investing world. I realized one of my biggest passions is helping and teaching people. And I've been able to do that immensely through real estate sales. And most real estate agents don't look at it like that. So, I'll take on the client that's looking for a $100,000 first investment property. Even though it might not be the best use of my time, I'm helping to teach them. And eventually they will usually turn into something else, something bigger, if I do my job right and they're successful at it. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the biggest differences is just belief in yourself and understanding what the actual job is when you go to jump into being a full-time investor or contractor or agent. You're likely not going to be a successful agent if your idea of going full-time and being an agent is just buying your own stuff. Unless you have a massive amount of money and you can really, build off of that. Yeah. But I think you have to understand that you're going to have a job, at least for a while, in building your business. And that's going to be one of the biggest differences.
And the biggest, another difference to add to your point is that you're a business owner when you become a real estate agent, right? Mm-hmm. And you talked about a little bit about taking responsibility. It's not like a normal traditional job. We work for another employer. Like you have to take responsibility, like you said, for lead generation, right? Yeah. For understanding your market. There's so many agents. I'm an agent as well, right? And I see so many agents so apathetic about, really understanding markets. And so when out-of-town investors come in, they get totally turned off by the fact that they basically don't know anything about, the investing world of their area or how things are transacted, right? I get clients coming to me all the time that, had poor experiences with their agents because they didn't view it the way they did as an investor. And there really are so few agents that are investor friendly, like truly investor friendly, that you can set yourself apart if you decide to become an agent. If you really just dive deep into your market, understand the logistics, hang around other investors, go to meetups, right? And really just dive in and realize that you are a business owner.
Right. Absolutely. And to be like, we're in such a unique position as a real estate agent as well, that's actually doing the work of a real estate agent. I'll probably do about 60 to 70 deals this year as a real estate agent. And, it's a mix of investors, buyers, things like that. And so if I'm helping a flipping client, I'm going to be like, hey, I was just out, this past weekend with a bunch of buyers and this is what they're looking at. This is what they like. This is what they don't like. This is what doesn't matter. All of these different things. So as a real estate agent, if you can really show your expertise in that, versus just, go show people houses, you're going to be valuable, and people are going to, you're going to get shared word of mouth, all that stuff.
Yeah. You get great perspective. And then, like you said, you have to be versatile too, right?
Yeah.
You can't just target you can target one specific niche, but if you want to be really successful, like you have been, right, is, being able to target people with first-time home buyers or people that are looking for just a regular home. They want to move in ready. They don't want to do any of the work, right? Like, that's a great niche to attract to. But then you also have to deal with investors, house hackers, right? Flippers, right? Everything is unique, right? A house hackers look for something totally different than a flipper will, probably, right? And so, being versatile is another talent of itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to your short-term goals here in 2020, and then your long-term goals in real estate and beyond going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of it's funny, as you get older and you've been investing in different things longer, you really start to, somebody might tell you a lesson 2 or 3 years ago, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. No, I understand that. And then you actually feel it, and you're like, oh my gosh, now I understand that. So one of the biggest things, and this is actually a book I would highly recommend. It's called The One Thing by Gary Keller, with Keller Williams. And so a lot of the books that he put together are really foundational to our education within Keller Williams. And so one of the basic idea of that book is focus on one thing, find one thing and focus on it, which is very different from what I have traditionally done, which is focus on a ton of different things, right? And you can see it, right? House hack, live and flip, be an agent, buy my own BRRRRs, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, 2020 is the year of kind of understanding where my time should be in different things. And so for me, when I looked at what my lead domino was, or what's the most important thing for me to start with at first, it's really helping to build this foundation in my real estate agent business. So my goal as a real estate agent in 2020 is to do 20 million in sales. The last 2 years, I've done about 10 million. So it's doubling that. But it's really scaling back on how many construction projects I'm running. Last year, I ran probably about 15 different construction projects. So, that takes a ton of time. You never know when an inspector is going to have to call. If you're doing the inspections yourself, they might call you on a Tuesday and say, I'll be there at 2:00, and you planned on them to be there at 10:00. Really hard to plan days and things like that. So that's really been my biggest lesson from 2019 is, hey, this is also the year I'm getting married, things like that. So it's let me actually, enjoy and focus on one thing, and then things kind of come out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's actually saying no to some investing deals. It's really doubling down on, as a real estate agent, and building the base so that I can build my team from that. I've got 2 agents on my team and an admin. And so really supporting them the best way that I can. And then really building the community around me of investors, young investors that are doing the house hacks and things like that. So that's where a lot of my sales come from. So it's really doubling down and helping those people and giving the deals that would typically come to me that I might buy to my investor clients. So that's kind of my 2020, and I think 2021 is a little bit of finding that balance back and forth. And I think my goal by the end of 2021 would be at about 100 units, but a lot of that happening towards the end of 2020 and into 2021. So that's really, that's my biggest goal, to enjoy getting married to, we're going to do another live and flip. So that'll be probably the only construction project that I run this year. If I do any other stuff in my partnerships, my partners will run those investment deals or the actual construction of it. But it's really focusing on taking care of my clients.
Cool, man. So what would you say separates potential house hackers from those who are actually doing it?
Yeah, I think it's how they value risk and actually just moving forward and having confidence. Those are the two really big things. And so I think one of the challenges in how we're educated and things like that is nobody ever sits you down and says, here's how you should evaluate the risk of different things. The risk of having a 9-to-5 job where you pay into Social Security and hoping that Social Security is there for you when, you go to retire is actually really, really risky, but nobody tells you that that's risky. If anything, you're taught that's the least risky thing to do. Whereas it's seen as risky that, you might go start your own business or do something like that. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges for really every investor, but especially house hackers. And I think with house hackers, if they can overcome that and kind of reshape their way that their risk is calculated, because it really ends up coming from our families and our friends. You know, what are our families and friends doing? I find that if I have a friend group where one of them house hacks, the whole friend group is more likely to house hack, right? Versus, or if, you find this all the time. My first client is actually like, he was a really conservative guy. And I was like, dude, you're never gonna like really go for like a house hack. And turns out his dad did a house hack, you know, didn't know the term or anything like that, but his dad did a house hack right out of college. And so his dad had always kind of told him, yeah, after you graduate college, like you should buy a house and like live with your buddies and have them pay your rent. And so for him, like the risk was totally like switched around. Is like, oh, my dad did it, like I can do it kind of thing. So,
Absolutely.
you know, that's one of the biggest things is how do you look at risk, and how can you get yourself to change the view of risk? And then from there, it's really, do you have the confidence to move forward with a deal? You know, I had one client that like almost got to the closing table. You know, we were 2 weeks away from closing, and he was like, I just can't do it, you know. And I since found somebody else for that same house hack. It was a really unique, awesome house hack. And they've like had wild success with it. Probably one of the best house hacks that one of my clients has had. Yet somebody just didn't have the confidence and the way to evaluate that risk to understand this is a really great deal. And then he really just kind of was his own worst enemy there. So I mean, I think those are the two big things: is confidence, and then how do you evaluate risk, and how do you learn to reevaluate risk?
And that's why it's so important to find an agent like yourself, right, that can lend that confidence, because that really is important.
Yeah.
Looking back at Drew and myself back when we were beginners, right, that's what we lacked. And I'm sure you probably had moments like that too, where you lack some confidence. I've always been somebody similar to you that has been supremely confident in myself. But when you come to big decisions like that, sometimes you need to lean on others. And so when you find a great agent like yourself, who's been there, who's done that, who evaluates, knows the difference, like you talked about, you know, getting a house hack that's higher end in your area generally is better long run, right, and in an ROI sense than maybe the lower price points. And so knowing that, you know, somebody goes in there with a $400,000 or $500,000 property or whatever it is, man, you can get a little gun shy. But when you got an agent like yourself that can say, hey, look at these numbers, look at the long term, look at the appreciation rate, look at what's developing, like all the, you know, it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the really cool thing is like after you have time, I can actually just refer them to other house hackers and say like, hey, here, if you have some concerns, call this guy. You know, he did a similar house hack to you. Like he'll tell you the pros and cons and things like that. And so if you're looking to house hack, you really should be able to rely on your agent as a hub to kind of be able to tell you, hey, here's some other people that have done stuff like this, or you know, here's a resource in the podcast or whatever it might be, so you can hear some stories. Maybe reach out to those people if you want to do something kind of similar to that. And I think, you know, that is a really good way to reevaluate your risk, or to complement your confidence, you know, to say like, hey, okay, this person's really done it. And so I can, you know, I now have two people. One of them is not, you know, relying on a commission at all for me. And I've been really conscious of that, because as a real estate agent, you know, our incentive is to get a deal closed, right? Mm-hmm. But so if you're going with a real estate agent that doesn't sell much, they need that to make their next house payment, things like that. Like it can, you know, they can give you some not necessarily the best guidance, especially in house hacking. So finding somebody that's had success with it, and then are they backing up what they're saying that is helping to give you confidence with data? You know, can they give people that are similar? You know, it's really cool to be able to sell a house hack and have a house hack 5 blocks away that somebody else does, and it's like they're getting this much for a room, you know, and so it's really, really easy. So yeah.
So that's something I really hope comes out of this podcast too, that we instill that confidence into the listeners, because we have example after example of successful house hacks. And I think, you know, it's a way of like, maybe someone's not seeing it done, but they can listen how it's done from all these people. And I really hope that helps other people out. Absolutely.
I mean, there's the awesome thing about a house hack, especially in a single family where you're renting rooms out. The awesome thing is that in the world today, there is a very small amount of affordable properties, you know, in terms of like renting. You know, a 1-bedroom rent, you know, Baltimore here is like $1,000 to $1,500. If you're in the nice areas, it's like $2,000. And so it's a really, really fantastic way to provide lower cost stuff. And so many people are looking for that. that I think what most people's worry is like, what if I don't feel this thing, or what if the people are just crazy people or whatever.
Mhm.
And I've like really been waiting for somebody to be like, hey, I've had this crazy story, like, it just went to, everything was horrible, and nobody's had that outside of the one gentleman that he just had a sewer backup,
Right.
and insurance took care of it, and then he sold it for a profit, right? So it's like I've been waiting for that, but that I hope that you guys get that out too. Is like there are so many instances or so few instances where people have had bad experiences, and really it's because you're providing the market with something that's not readily available.
And the biggest thing is that being a house hacker, you mitigate that risk, right? Because it's your own, your own property. You don't have two mortgages to pay or whatever the case might be, right? The first year that I had my first house hack, my sewer backed up on Christmas Day, right?
Oh.
So Christmas night, I had to hire this 24-hour service, right? Paid ridiculous price.
Yeah.
But like these problems come up, but when you're house hacking, you mitigate those risks, right? It's been the greatest deal I've ever done, that first one. And it was kind of a house hack BRRRR, combo like you've done.
Right.
But when those situations arise, you mitigate it because you're living for free, right? You should be saving a lot of the cash flow you're receiving for instances like this. So when things come up, it's just what you're expecting owning real estate. And there's so many benefits outside of those. You get to, of course, write those off eventually, right? You get depreciation benefits and taxes. Like there's so many benefits to doing it that it mitigates all these small hiccups. So you talked a little bit about reading, right? You talked about One Mindset book, which is The One Thing by Gary Keller, which is a phenomenal book. What's another one of your favorite business or mindset specific books?
Yeah, I mean the one thing is a great one. I really love that one. Probably, so less so like related to real estate and more probably about personal development. Depending on where you are in your life, I think Awaken the Giant by Tony Robbins is a fantastic one. If you've never been to a Tony Robbins event or anything like that, it's just a really, really great way of doing a deep dive into yourself and then also figuring out like, what do I want to do with my life, because the more that you can stack these reasons on of like, why are you investing, like, what are you doing it for? And I shared a little bit for me, it's helping other people in terms of educating them, and I've been super fortunate to have incredible educators in my life and role models and things like that. And so, part of my goal is to be that for other people. And if that wasn't one of my whys, then it makes it a little bit harder when there's a late night or when I got to go do something that I really don't want to go do. And so I think really being able to build those whys on top of each other. And I think Awaken the Giant Within is a really great one. So that and The One Thing are really fantastic, not real estate related books, there. So,
yeah.
Cool. So what about a real estate book?
Yeah. So, I really like, again, Gary Keller writes some really great stuff. As a real estate agent, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, they call it the Red Book, and Keller Williams is really, really fantastic on understanding like what an agent actually does and like what does your business actually look like, for one. And then Millionaire Real Estate Investor also kind of breaks down that stuff a lot. I also love stories that are just like almost biographical about people. Might even have it here. Yeah, here it is. So there's this one guy I was talking to, my mentor, Bo Mankitti, who owns the Mankitti Group. And him and his wife were telling me about how they're kind of structuring some of their development stuff off this guy named Trammell Crow. And unless you live in Texas, maybe you haven't heard much about him. But he was like in the early-ish 1900s to mid-1900s, he really took real estate to like the next level. His company was built through partnerships and things like that. And so I think there's two books called Trammell Crow. This is one of them. And it's just he's a fantastic kind of model of like, how did he do stuff? And it's not always lessons on how he did them well. He would just make these partnerships. And before he even finalized a partnership with a handshake, he'd be build a building with them and things like that, which, it's just kind of craziness. Yeah. But I love hearing the stories of people. And that's a fantastic story of how he built, I believe at the peak, it was the biggest real estate company in the world. Wow. In terms of holdings. And he invented the modern, I don't know if it was the strip mall or like modern market, like industrial kind of market. And so he really kind of took those things to the next level. So that's really cool if you just want like a biographical, like kind of get motivated of like, what could things look like really, really big. Yeah. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's great to know, getting personal recommendations from, somebody you really respect, like a role model or somebody that is mentoring you is important, right? Because they specialize into their own life, right? We get all these books from, big figures, and Bigger Pockets puts out a lot of great books and stuff. But when you have a personal experience with somebody that you're dealing with, like the Mankiti Group, who can say, hey, check this book out. It's lesser known, but it fits right to your life and kind of what you're trying to do. Like, that's a great way to go as well.
Right. Absolutely.
So we genuinely appreciate you coming on today. If somebody were in your market, or if somebody wants to reach out to you about your story, because your story is awesome, and a lot of people, at your age want to do exactly what you're doing. How can people reach out to you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in the market and you ever want to get together or anything like that, you can email me. My email is acarroll@kw.com. That's Carroll, ACARROLL @kw.com. I'm on social media on Facebook. You can just find me Austin Carroll. Instagram, I think I'm acarroll1030. Not super active on those, but that's one of my goals for this year, is just to share a lot more on that. Because there's so often where I'm just walking through projects and I could be sharing that stuff. Also, let me see if you're in the market as well, or you just need some advice on house hacking. Devin Marino is my partner, and he does a lot of house hacking. I think it's called the Baltimore Investor Network.
And we can add all this to the show notes. We'll link it all to it.
Cool. That would be perfect. Baltimore Investor Network on YouTube. He talks a lot about, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I'll send it to you so you guys can have look at that. But that's a great way to just kind of watch some of those YouTube videos. I'm on a lot of them. I'm going to be looking to get on more of them, but he's really, really good at social media and YouTube and stuff like that. So if anybody reaches out to him too, he'll probably loop me in. So yeah, I mean, I think those places are the best way to kind of reach me. I've got a website, bluekeyteam.com. If you want to, it's got like a link to the MLS and stuff like that. If you'd like to go there and kind of search some stuff, you can also request a view of property and things like that. It'll come straight to me. So yeah, those would be the ways.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on. I mean, your story is phenomenal. 64 units, sold 10 million, trying to sell 20 in this coming year. And so we really appreciate you coming on. I know a lot of people can relate to where you're at and where they want to go through your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. And thanks for doing what you do. It's incredible for people to have this resource and hear so many different stories of house hackers and investors and stuff like that. So I appreciate you guys doing that.
Absolutely, man.
Thanks for listening. If you could do me a huge favor and go give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, I would really appreciate it. It would really help us out. If we provided any value, please go do that. Otherwise, there's a lot of people who haven't subscribed, so go ahead and go subscribe and you'll get notifications when a new podcast episode is released. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.